Kamran and Nabeela seemed to have it all. Married for 10 years, they were the picture of a perfect couple. Kamran, a successful businessman, worked long hours to provide for the life they shared, while Nabeela, a graceful and beautiful woman, dedicated herself to their home. Their life together was full of comfort, luxury, and shared dreams. But something was slowly beginning to shift, an unspoken distance between them that neither wanted to acknowledge. Kamran adored Nabeela. He still remembered the day they met, how her smile lit up the room, how her laugh made him forget the world around him. Their love had always been passionate, filled with moments of quiet affection and deep connection. Yet lately, he felt as though he was losing her. She no longer greeted him with the warmth she once did. Her kisses had become mere pecks, and their conversations had become brief and strained. Nabeela, on the other hand, had begun to feel restless. She loved Kamran, of course, but somewhere along the way, the excitement that once filled her heart had faded. Their life, though perfect on the surface, no longer fulfilled her in the way it once did. She longed for the thrill, the attention, the passion she had once felt when they first met. She felt invisible, lost in the routine of a life that had once been a dream, but now felt like a carefully constructed facade. Unbeknownst to Kamran, Nabeela's yearning for something more was about to lead her down a dangerous path. And with every passing day, the distance between them would grow wider, until the walls of their once perfect life came crashing down. Nabeela's restlessness grew each day, and in the quiet corners of her mind, she began to entertain the idea of something more. She had never intended for things to change between her and Kamran, but somewhere along the way, she had become lost in the perfect life they had built together. It was a life that looked flawless to the outside world, but behind closed doors, there was an emptiness she could no longer ignore. One evening, while scrolling through her phone, she came across Shaheer, a man she had met at a charity event months ago. He was charming, attentive, and his messages made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. At first, their conversations were innocent, light-hearted exchanges about mutual interests. But as time went on, the flirtation began to seep in, like a quiet storm building just beneath the surface. Shaheer didn't just offer her attention. He made her feel seen. Each message, each compliment, made her feel special in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. He was everything Kamran had once been, the spark she had craved but couldn't find. His words were like a breath of fresh air, drawing her in with the promise of excitement, passion, and a chance to escape the routine of her life. The first time they met for coffee, Nabeela felt a rush of nervous energy. Shaheer's smile was easy, his eyes warm with interest, and she couldn't help but be drawn to him. It was nothing more than an innocent meeting, or so she told herself. She laughed at his jokes, enjoyed the easy chemistry between them, and left the cafe with a fluttering heart. But what started as harmless flirtation soon crossed a line, and that line would forever change the course of her life. Their meetings became more frequent, their touch more intimate, and the passion between them undeniable. Nabeela found herself thinking of him constantly, the thrill of their secret growing with each stolen moment. In Shaheer's arms, she felt alive again, desired, wanted, above all important. But each time she left him, a flicker of guilt washed over her, only to be replaced by the excitement of her next secret rendezvous. As much as she tried to convince herself it was just a brief escape, deep down, she knew it had become something more. The affair had begun, and Nabeela could no longer turn back. Kamran had always trusted Nabeela. They had built a life together based on love and mutual respect, and he believed that trust was the foundation of their marriage. But lately, something had been gnawing at him, an unease he couldn't shake. At first, it was small things. The way she would check her phone late at night, her distracted smile when he tried to talk to her, the empty silence where their laughter used to be. He told himself it was nothing, just the stress of life, maybe even his own insecurities. But the nagging feeling in his gut refused to go away. One evening, after coming home from a long day at work, Kamran found Nabeela in the living room, scrolling through her phone with an expression he didn't recognize. She looked up quickly when he entered, flashing him a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something was off. The woman he once knew, the woman he had fallen in love with, was slipping away from him, and he could feel it. It was more than just a distance. It was a coldness that had settled between them. His suspicion grew, and Kamran found himself torn between confronting her or brushing off as another fleeting worry. But the doubt continued to eat at him, gnawing away at his peace. He had never been the jealous type, but lately he felt as if something was being kept from him, something important. Unable to ignore it any longer, Kamran made a decision that would forever change the course of their marriage. He hired a private investigator. The investigator was discreet, professional, and within days, Kamran was presented with evidence that shattered his world. He sat in his office, staring at the photographs and messages in front of him, his heart sinking with each new revelation. Nabeela, his beautiful, loving wife, had been seeing someone else. His mind refused to accept it at first, the images too painful to believe. But the proof was undeniable. She had been meeting Shaheer, the man she had told him about as just a friend at first. Their messages, once sweet, had become increasingly flirtatious. And worse still, the private meetings, carefully planned rendezvous that Kamran never even suspected, revealed the depth of her betrayal. A mixture of rage and heartbreak consumed him. How could she do this? How could she betray the trust they had built, the love he had given her so freely? The pain was sharp, cutting deeper than he had imagined possible. But there was something else in him, too, something cold and calculating. His mind began to work, and the gears of a plan began turning. Kamran realized that confronting her in this moment would only give her a chance to explain, to justify. He didn't want that. He wanted justice. He wanted to make her feel what he felt. Betrayed, humiliated, helpless. He wanted her to know the full extent of the hurt she had caused. Nabeela had thought she could keep her secret hidden, that the affair would remain her own private escape. But in truth, she had been playing with fire. And now, Kamran had all the fuel he needed to light the match. As the days passed, the pain began to transform into something else, something darker. Kamran no longer saw his wife as the woman he had loved. Instead, he saw her as a woman who had deceived him, a woman who had stolen the trust and affection he had freely given. He could feel the anger building inside him, but it was tempered by something much stronger, the desire for revenge. Kamran didn't confront Nabeela. As much as the anger burned in his chest, he refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him hurt, of watching him break. He had been betrayed, yes, but he was not going to let her see how deeply her actions had wounded him. No, this was no longer about a simple confrontation. This was about something far more devastating. His love for her had been real, but now it was overshadowed by something far darker, a need for justice, for retribution, for a lesson that she would never forget. He spent the next few days in a numb, calculated fog, his mind working overtime to devise a plan so perfect, so cruel in its precision, that it would break her in ways she couldn't anticipate. The anger still simmered beneath the surface, but it was no longer just anger. It was strategy, and every move Kamran made was carefully thought out. Kamran began by reaching out to a few of Nabeela's closest friends, people she trusted, people who admired her and looked up to her. He started dropping hints, whispering half-truths that cast a shadow on her reputation. He never told them outright about the affair. He didn't need to. The smallest suggestion was enough. A phone call here, a subtle message there. He planted seeds of doubt, making them question her character, her loyalty. Slowly, he watched as those around her began to turn. People who had once been her confidants now looked at her with suspicion. One by one, her social circle began to shrink as her friends subtly distanced themselves. Nabeela felt the shift before she could understand it. At first, it was small, casual remarks, fleeting glances, the sudden coolness from people she had once trusted. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. People began canceling plans, pulling away from her. Her world, once so full of admiration and friendship, began to feel colder, more isolated. She could feel the whispers, though they were never said aloud. She could sense that people were starting to judge her, but she had no idea why. Her guilt was already eating at her, but now it was turning into something else. Fear. Fear of being exposed. Then came the first real blow. Kamran, ever the strategist, took a step further. He knew how much Nabeela valued her career, how much she took pride in her work, in her reputation, as the perfect wife and partner. So he anonymously tipped off her workplace, giving them the evidence of her affair, photos, messages, and even a few of the incriminating emails that hinted at a more serious betrayal. Nabeela had never realized how vulnerable her own actions had made her. She had thought that keeping the affair hidden was enough, that no one would ever know. But Kamran had made sure of one thing. No one would be able to ignore it now. Her boss, a woman who had always admired Nabeela for her dedication and poise, called her into the office one fateful afternoon. Kamran's anonymous tip had worked. Nabeela was suspended. The scandal was too much for the company to overlook. The whispers of her infidelity had spread, and now her professional life was in shambles. Nabeela sat in her boss's office, her Shaheer turning as she was told that the company could no longer continue their association with her. The shock of it hit harder than the affair itself. Her professional identity was gone. Her carefully curated image of a perfect wife and successful woman was crumbling before her eyes. That night, she came home, her mind racing with confusion and disbelief. As she entered the house, Kamran was sitting in his usual chair, his expression unreadable. The silence between them was thick, suffocating, and yet he said nothing. His gaze lingered on her with something she couldn't place, a quiet intensity, as if he knew everything, but chose to say nothing. She tried to speak, tried to explain, but the words caught in her throat. The guilt, the shame, it all poured over her at a rush. She could feel the weight of her actions, but there was something else there too, the fear of what was coming. Kamran did not comfort her. He did not reach out for her hand. He simply sat there, watching her, waiting. Her eyes filled with tears, but Kamran didn't flinch. He had already made his decision. His love for her was no longer enough to save her. She had taken his trust, his devotion, and shattered it. Now, he would watch as she faced the consequences of her choices. Nabeela stood in front of him, trembling, but Kamran remained still. He knew this was only the beginning. Nabeela's world was crumbling faster than she could process. Every time she turned a corner, another part of her life shattered. Her friends had turned their backs on her. Her career was in tatters, and now she found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering who knew what and how much they knew. But the worst part, the part that twisted her inside with guilt and fear, was that she knew Kamran was behind it. He was a shadow in the corners of her life, always watching, always waiting. She could feel his presence in everything. Every lost job opportunity, every whispered conversation, every moment of isolation. At first, she had thought Kamran might confront her, demand answers, but that had never come. Instead, his silence had been worse than any angry confrontation. He had become a ghost, someone who stood beside her but was emotionally unreachable. When she tried to talk to him, he remained distant, his eyes cold and calculating. She could see in the way he looked at her now. His love had transformed into something darker, something she feared. And then the phone call came. Nabeela was sitting at home, her mind swirling with anxiety, when her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. She answered it, thinking it might be a friend reaching out, or perhaps someone from the company she had been suspended from. "Ms. Owens," the voice on the other end asked, professional but stern. "We need you to come down to the station for questioning regarding your involvement in a criminal matter." Her heart stopped. The words didn't make sense. Criminal? What was she being accused of? Her thoughts raced as her pulse quickened. Are you arresting me?" she stammered, barely able to comprehend what was happening. There was a pause, and then the voice spoke again. "We have evidence that ties you to a scheme involving fraudulent activities. We'd like to speak to you in person. Please come down to the station." Nabeela's head spun. She had no idea what this was about. What was this scheme? She hadn't been involved in anything criminal. Had she? Shaheer? But no, she couldn't believe it. She had made mistakes. But not this. Before she could even gather her thoughts, there was a knock at the door. The uniformed officer stood on her doorstep, their faces serious. The words they spoke were a blur as they read her rights and placed her hands behind her back. Shock gave way to panic, and the cold metal of the handcuffs was the final confirmation that her life was no longer hers to control. As they led her to the car, Her eyes instinctively searched for Kamran. She expected to see him, standing there with that cold, unreadable expression of his, watching her. But he wasn't there. He wasn't there to comfort her or to tell her that everything would be okay. He wasn't there to hold her hand as she was driven away in the back of a police car. Instead, his absence felt like a weight on her chest, an unbearable reminder that everything had been ripped from her, her life, her freedom, her dignity. Kamran had never been the type to raise his voice in anger, but this silence, this deliberate, calculated silence, cut deeper than any confrontation could have. She realized too late that this was his ultimate revenge. She had thought she could keep the affair a secret, that it would never come to light. She had thought she could have it all, the affair with Shaheer, the life with Kamran. But now, as the officers drove her away, the gravity of what she had done began to hit her with full force. Nabeela's mind raced. Was Kamran behind this? Had he orchestrated everything? Her Shaheer act twisted at the thought. Of course, it made sense now. The professional tip-offs, the whispers of her betrayal that echoed throughout her social circle, the loss of her job. It all added up. But this was a final nail in her coffin. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was legal. The affair, which had started as an escape, had led her into a nightmare of criminal involvement. She could feel the walls closing around her, and for the first time, she felt truly powerless. Inside the police station, the weight of the charges began to sink in. Fraud, conspiracy, involvement in a money laundering scheme. It wasn't just an affair. She had unknowingly become entangled in Shaheer's mess, and now, it seemed there was no escape. Her entire life was now on trial. Kamran's revenge had come full circle, and Nabeela realized, with a crushing clarity, that she had lost. Not just Kamran's love, but everything she had ever known. Her marriage, her career, her freedom, it was all gone. And in that moment, the truth hit her harder than anything else. She had never truly understood the man she had married. Kamran had been the silent architect of her downfall. He had never needed to shout, to rage. He had only needed to watch, to wait, and to destroy her in the most devastating way possible. Nabeela was left to face the consequences of her actions, and it was clear now Kamran had won. Kamran stood alone in the empty house, the silence around him heavier than he had anticipated. The echoes of his own footsteps felt like reminders of the life he had once shared with Nabeela. His revenge had been thorough, and yet, as he looked around at the life he had destroyed, something within him seemed hollow. He had achieved everything he set out to do. Nabeela had lost everything. Her career, her reputation, her freedom. And yet, he couldn't shake the emptiness that lingered within him. What had he really gained? The love he had once cherished was gone. The woman he had vowed to protect had betrayed him in the most painful way possible. But in the end, revenge hadn't brought him peace. It had only left him with more questions. Had Nabeela truly understood the weight of her actions? Did she ever love him the way he had loved her? As he sat in the quiet of their home, he couldn't help but feel the absence of something more important than justice. His own heart, which had been slowly eroded by the bitterness of betrayal. Nabeela had taken his trust, his love, and in the end, she had taken his sense of self. He had set out to make her feel the pain she had caused, but in doing so, he had lost a part of himself as well. In prison, Nabeela sat alone in her cell, the harsh reality of her situation sinking in. She had ruined her life, and the affair that seemed so thrilling, so full of promise, had led her to this point. There were no second chances now, no way to undo what had been done. As she stared out through the bars, she thought of Kamran. His silence had been the sharpest betrayal of all. He had won, and now she was left to face the consequences of her own choices.